Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going back in time a bit, back to 1991, and we're headed to Bucks County, Pennsylvania. You know, kind of thing like, those peaceful neighborhoods where everyone knows everyone, and then, bam, total murder mystery. And it took over 2 decades to solve.
Wow.
So this is the story of Joy Hibbs.
Joy Hibbs was 35 years old, mother of 2, full of warmth and southern charm. She and her husband had moved up from Florida.
Oh, wow.
Everyone loved her.
Yeah, and I mean, from what I read, it seems like she was living, that picture-perfect life. So, like, what went wrong?
Well, on April 1991, her son, David, came home from school and found their house on fire.
Oh, my God. I can't even imagine coming home to that.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. I bet he thought he, left something on.
He did. He blamed himself for a while. Heartbreaking.
Oh, it's so sad.
But the firefighters realized this was no accident. They found 4 different spots where the fire had been set.
Okay, so arson. But it gets crazier, right? This wasn't just a fire.
The autopsy showed that Joy had been stabbed multiple times, strangled and probably suffocated before the fire even started.
Oh, my gosh.
Whoever did this wanted to cover their tracks, make it look like an accident.
So who would do such a thing to someone like Joy? Did she have any enemies? Was this like a robbery gone wrong?
The police looked into all of that. There was no sign of forced entry, and nothing valuable was missing. Except for some cash from her purse, robberies just didn't add up. Everyone said Joy was the kindest person.
Okay, but someone had to have done this. The trail can't just go cold, right? What happened next?
Well, the family remembered some creepy things happening before the fire.
Oh, really?
Like a brick through the window, the door getting kicked in, tires slashed.
God.
I felt like someone was targeting them, and it wasn't random.
And this is where the neighbor comes into play.
You got it. Joy's son remembered seeing a distinct blue Monte Carlo around their house, a car that belonged to their neighbor, Robert Atkins. And get this, Atkins had a history of being aggressive, had some shady connections to the drug world, and even argued with Joy before.
Okay, so we got a suspect with a motive.
Yeah.
Possible connection to the crime scene. Sounds like an open and shut case, right?
Not so fast. Atkins told the police he and his family were on a trip to the Poconos when the murder happened. And at first, his alibi checked out.
Wait, so how did this become a cold case? It seems like they had their guy.
Here's where things get interesting. Remember how Atkins had connections to the drug world? The cops who first questioned him were actually narcotics detectives. And guess what?
What?
He was their informant.
You're kidding. So the cops investigating a murder were getting information from the prime suspect.
Yep. Oh, no.
And to make matters worse, they basically tipped him off about the investigation.
You gotta be kidding me. Talk about a conflict of interest.
It was a huge mess. By the time the homicide detectives got involved, it was too late. Crucial evidence was lost. And Atkins was prepared with his lawyer by his side. He knew his rights and wasn't talking.
So what happened? Did they just give up? For a while, it seemed that way. The case went cold. And Joy's family was left with unanswered questions and a gaping hole in their lives.
Oh, gosh.
But, as we'll see, time can be a powerful tool in the pursuit of justice.
So we left off with the case going ice cold. What happened next? Did Joy's family just accept that they might never get answers?
Not a chance. They never gave up hope. For over 20 years, they kept pushing for the case to be reopened.
Wow.
And in 2014, they finally got a break.
Okay, but after all that time, what changed? Did some new evidence magically appear?
Not exactly. A new district attorney was elected, and he took a fresh look at the case. He assigned a whole new team of investigators, led by this super dedicated prosecutor named Jen Shaw.
Sounds like she meant business. What was their strategy? Did they have any new leads?
They went back to square one, re-examining every single detail.
Yeah.
And remember that airtight alibi that Atkins had, the Poconos trip? They started poking holes in it.
How so? What did they find?
First, the timing was off. The motel check-in time was hours after Joy must have been killed. Plenty of time for Atkins to commit the murder and then drive to the Poconos.
Okay, so the alibi wasn't as solid as it seemed, but did they have anything else to go on?
Then remember the witness who saw Atkins's blue Monte Carlo near Joy's house on the day of the murder?
Yeah, but didn't you say they later changed their story?
Well, it turns out that when the police later showed this witness a black Monte Carlo at Atkins' apartment, they asked if that was the car they'd seen, and the witness said no.
Hold on, so they were shown a totally different car. Why would the cops do that?
It seems pretty suspicious, right? It makes you wonder if Atkins maybe intimidated the witness into changing their story to protect himself. Remember, this was a guy with a history of violence.
Oh, that's messed up. So what was the turning point in the case? What finally led to Atkins' arrest?
This is where it gets really wild.
Okay.
Remember April, Robert Atkins' ex-wife?
Yeah, wasn't she friends with Joy? What a betrayal.
It gets even more complicated. April had been silent for over 2 decades, but she finally decided to come forward.
What made her break her silence after all those years?
It sounds like she was living with a ton of guilt and fear. She'd been terrified of Atkins for years, even after their divorce. But after all that time, she felt like she needed to tell the truth.
So what did April tell the investigators?
She said that on the day of Joy's murder, Atkins came home covered in blood. He told her he'd stabbed someone.
Oh my God. And set their house on fire. Can you imagine the horror of hearing that? Oh my God, that's terrifying. So he confessed to her?
He did. And out of fear for herself and her kids, April went along with whatever he said. They packed up and drove to the Poconos that same day, checking into a motel hours after Joy was likely killed.
Wow, what a nightmare for April. But why didn't she go to the police right away?
She was terrified of what Atkins would do if he found out she talked. But as time went on, the guilt ate away at her. She later realized that the woman Atkins had confessed to killing was Joy, her friend.
Wow, that adds a whole other level of heartbreak to this story.
Yeah.
So with April's testimony, did they finally have enough to arrest Atkins?
They were getting close. But remember, this was a cold case. Memories had faded. Physical evidence was likely gone. They needed something more concrete to secure a conviction.
So what did they do?
They got smart. They knew that time, which had been their enemy for so long, could now work in their favor.
How so?
Well, people who were once terrified of Atkins were now more willing to come forward. They knew he was no longer a direct threat, and the investigators were determined to use this to their advantage. They set up a brilliant sting operation.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me everything. What did they do?
They had April call Atkins while they secretly listened in.
Okay, and how did Atkins react? Did he fall for it?
Hook, line, and sinker. He panicked and basically told April to plead the fifth, even suggesting her phone might be tapped.
Talk about incriminating yourself.
Right. That call was a huge breakthrough. But there was one final piece of the puzzle. That really sealed Atkins' fate.
What was that?
His own son?
His son. What did he know about the murder?
Atkins' son was called to testify before a grand jury. He was hesitant at first, but he eventually revealed a conversation he'd had with his father.
Okay, this is getting intense. What did they talk about?
Atkins had confided in his son, worried that he might be arrested for something that happened 30 years ago. He never outright confessed to killing Joy, but he said things like, "I think I did it."
Wow, that's pretty damning coming from your own son.
It was. It convinced the grand jury to recommend charges of first-degree murder, arson, and robbery. And finally, after all those years, Robert Atkins was arrested.
It's amazing how time can change everything. What was once a cold case with no leads suddenly had multiple witnesses and incriminating statements. What happened at the trial?
The trial was a roller coaster of emotions. The prosecution had to carefully piece together the evidence, weaving a story that convinced the jury beyond a reasonable doubt.
That couldn't have been easy with a case this old. What were some of the challenges they faced?
The defense tried to discredit the witnesses, especially April. They argued that she was motivated by revenge or seeking attention. They also questioned the reliability of Atkins' son's testimony, claiming it was coerced.
Did the prosecution present any physical evidence?
Unfortunately, much of it was lost due to the fire and the passage of time, but they had something even more powerful: the chilling accounts of people who were finally ready to stand up to Atkins and tell the truth.
You mentioned earlier that Atkins had a history of violence. Did that come up during the trial?
It did. The investigators discovered that Atkins had brutally attacked his own aunt when he was a teenager. She survived, but it showed a disturbing pattern of aggression, especially towards women.
Wow, that's chilling. But I imagine they couldn't just mention that randomly during the trial, right?
You're right. The judge decided that mentioning this past attack would be too prejudicial and could unfairly sway the jury's opinion. They had to focus on the evidence directly related to Joy's murder.
Okay, that makes sense. So despite those challenges, the prosecution managed to convince the jury, right?
They did. The jury found Robert Atkins guilty of first-degree murder and arson. He was sentenced to life in prison, bringing a long-awaited sense of justice for Joy's family.
That must have been a huge relief for them after all those years of fighting for justice. But I'm curious, did they ever figure out why Atkins did it? What was his motive?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Even with a conviction, the motive remains a bit of a mystery.
So did they come up with any theories during the trial?
They did. One theory was that it was all about drugs. Remember those shady connections Atkins had?
Yeah.
Some folks thought maybe Joy owed him money, and things went south.
Oh, so like a drug deal gone bad wouldn't be the first time.
Right.
But something about that doesn't feel right, you know?
You're right. It does seem too simple, given how brutal the murder was. Some people, including the prosecutor, think there might have been a darker motive, something more personal.
What do you mean?
Well, remember how Atkins attacked his aunt when he was younger?
Yeah.
And how she and Joy look similar, both with that southern charm. Some folks believe that Joy might have reminded him of his aunt, and that the attack was fueled by something more sinister.
So it's possible Joy was targeted
Yes.
just because of who she reminded Atkins of? That's chilling.
Exactly. And it adds a whole other layer of complexity to the case. Sadly, we may never know the real reason why he did it.
It's crazy to think that after all those years, this case was finally solved. But it makes you wonder, could anything have been done differently in the beginning to prevent this from happening in the first place?
That's a tough question. If those narcotics detectives had called in the homicide team right away, instead of trying to protect their informant, maybe things would have turned out differently. It definitely makes you think about how conflicts of interest can impact justice.
Yeah, that whole situation with Atkins being an informant is just messed up. It sounds like those early mistakes in the investigation really allowed him to evade justice for years.
Absolutely. But this case also shows us the power of persistence and never giving up hope. Joy's family fought tirelessly for over 2 decades to get answers, and in the end, justice was served.
This whole story is a roller coaster. We've got a seemingly perfect life shattered by violence, a botched investigation, a family's unwavering determination, a shocking confession after years of silence, and ultimately a conviction that brought some sense of closure. It really makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. It highlights the fact that even in the most peaceful places, darkness can exist. And it underscores the importance of always pushing for the truth, no matter how much time has passed.
Well, this deep dive has definitely been a wild ride. It's a story about lost perseverance and the long road to justice. And it's a reminder that sometimes the truth takes time to surface. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the murder of Joy Hibbs. Until next time, stay curious.